crystal and pristine white tablecloths. It was the kind of beauty meant to dazzle, but for me, it was a reminder of how far from this world I truly was. Every night, I wore the mask of the perfect server, balancing trays heavier than my paycheck, hiding the ache in my feet from shoes I'd bought secondhand and scrubbed until they gleamed. At 26, with a master's degree in Italian literature and 6 figures of debt from my mother's medical bills, I had become invisible by necessity. The guests were not supposed to see me. They saw only their wine refilled, their plates cleared, their wishes anticipated before they ever needed to speak. I had learned to be a ghost. That Friday night, the restaurant pulsed with the kind of energy that made the staff restless and the air heavy. The owner himself was on the floor, straightening frames on the wall, adjusting flowers, snapping at us for water spots no one else would ever notice. Something important was happening. I could feel it in the way conversations hushed whenever the front doors opened, in the way the kitchen crew whispered among themselves. Marco, the floor manager, brushed past me with his cologne thick enough to choke. His eyes, small and sharp, pinned me with urgency. "Table 7, he hissed. "VIP. Don't screw this up, Sophia." My stomach nodded. Table 7 was always reserved, tucked behind an arrangement of orchids, hidden from the rest of the room. Tonight, it was occupied. I smoothed my apron with clammy palms, tucking a strand of dark hair behind my ear. I had no right to feel nervous, but something about the way the air shifted made me hesitate before stepping forward. The curved leather booth was occupied by 3 men, but only one mattered. He sat at the center, commanding the space without moving a muscle. Ven seated. I could tell he was tall. His suit, charcoal, perfectly tailored, shifted like liquid mercury whenever he leaned or adjusted, catching the light in ways that whispered wealth. His hair was dark, styled with precision, and his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. Unlike most men who dined here, he wore no wedding ring, no flashy timepiece. He didn't need adornments. The 2 men flanking him radiated a different kind of presence, thick-necked, broad, their eyes scanning the room with a predator's vigilance. Security. Armed, no doubt, even here. I approached with the same deference I'd perfected over the months, my gaze lowered just enough to appear respectful but not submissive. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Lissimo. May I bring you something to drink while you look at the menu?" The guards ignored me completely, their eyes never ceasing their restless scanning of exits and entrances. But the man in the center shifted, his attention sliding toward me like a spotlight. I felt it physically, the weight of it pressing against my skin. Slowly, I lifted my eyes to meet his. Blue. His eyes were an impossible shade of blue, the kind that seemed unnatural, like the airbrushed fantasy of a magazine cover. They should have been cold. I had expected them to be cold. Instead, they held something else, curiosity, interest, as if he had just stumbled upon something he hadn't anticipated. He spoke, his voice smooth, deep, and tinged with an accent I couldn't place. "Bring us your best Barolo, vintage 2010 or older." He spoke in flawless Italian. For a split second, my training faltered, my invisibility cracked. I answered automatically, in the language that had been as natural to me as breathing since my Sicilian grandmother raised me. "Certamente, signore. Abbiamo una riserva d'alba straordinaria, ma se preferisce qualcosa di più strutturato, potrei consigliare il B. Arolo Montfortino, del 2006. The silence that followed was absolute. A ripple went through the table. The guards stiffened, hands moving fractionally toward their jackets. And the man in the center, he froze. His blue eyes narrowed, pinning me with a gaze so sharp it sent a chill racing down my spine. For 3 heartbeats, the world around us ceased to exist. Conversations dulled, the clink of glassware faded, even my own breath seemed to hesitate. The entire room might as well have been holding its breath with me. And then, slowly, his mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Something more dangerous. Something that promised I had just stepped into territory I couldn't retreat from. In that instant, I knew something had shifted, though I couldn't yet name it. What had begun as just another Friday night at Lissimo was unraveling into something else, something that would not allow me to remain invisible any longer. The air outside Lissimo was sharp with October cold, but my skin burned as if I had stepped into fire. I walked fast, clutching the $1,000 bill Luca Vital had forced into my palm, trying to shake off the weight of his eyes on me. It should have ended there, a strange encounter with a man far too powerful for me to understand. But as I reached the L train stop, a black Bentley rolled to the curb like a shadow given shape. The back window slid down with a soft hum, and his face appeared in the darkness, those same blue eyes that had frozen me hours before. "Get in, Sophia," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried a command that left no space for refusal. I told myself to keep walking, to vanish into the crowd like I always did, but then he spoke again, and my blood turned to ice. "Your apartment on North Richmond isn't safe tonight. Neither is your cousin Ellie's couch." I froze. My cousin's name on his lips felt like a violation. He knew where I lived, where I slept, who I cared about. The Bentley door opened with a quiet click, its leather interior glowing faintly in the streetlight. His voice dropped lower. "Al, most soft. Please." It was that word that undid me. Please. From a man who radiated control, it was disarming in a way nothing else could have been. My legs moved before my mind could argue, and I slid onto the seat. The door closed with a sound like fate sealing itself. The car glided through Chicago's streets, silent except for the hum of the engine. I pressed myself against the door, heart racing. Luca sat across from me, not too close, but close enough that I could feel the heat of him. He didn't watch the road. He watched me. "You're frightened," he observed, eyes catching the passing streetlights. "You shouldn't be." I laughed, a sharp sound that broke the silence. "You know where I live, you know my cousin, you know what I studied. Men like you don't gather information like that without a reason." His lips curved faintly. Men like me. Dangerous men. Powerful men. He didn't deny it. He didn't have to. "My grandmother never told you about your family, did she?" he asked. His voice was too smooth, too intimate, as if he were already inside my secrets. I told him she had said nothing except that there had been a falling out in Sicily, that she had left behind olive groves and a family she rarely spoke of. "The olive groves existed," he said, "but the falling out was blood and betrayal. Your grandmother was Maria Vizzini, sister to Antonio Vizzini, one of the most feared men in Palermo." The name hit me like a blow. I shook my head. "That's impossible. My grandparents came here legally through Ellis Island. They were no one important." His eyes narrowed, sharp with something close to pity. "They had documentation forged. Antonio's enemies helped. Your grandmother fled with a policeman, Carlo Russo, who had infiltrated her brother's empire. She betrayed her bloodline. And you were the result of that betrayal." The city lights blurred outside the tinted glass as his words sank into me. It couldn't be true. It shouldn't be true. Yet a part of me remembered the way my grandmother had always avoided questions about her past, the way she had taught me Italian poems, but never stories of her own youth. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "Why do you care about a feud that ended before I was born?" "Because Antonio is dead," Luca said softly. "And with his death, the protections around you died too." The Bentley turned toward Lake Michigan, the dark water glittering under the moonlight. I sat frozen in the leather seat, clutching the sapphire pendant he handed me, a tracker he insisted I wear. His voice was steady, calm, as if we were discussing ordinary things. "Certain people have long memories," he said, "and you, Sophia Russo, are both vulnerable and valuable." The words echoed in my chest like a verdict. I was no longer invisible. I was caught in a story older than I could comprehend, bound by bloodlines I had never asked for. And sitting across from me was the man who had just pulled me into it, a man whose name carried both fear and fascination across Chicago. Luca Vital watched me as the car carried us into the night. His eyes were steady, unblinking, as if he already knew that my life no longer belonged to me. It belonged to history, and to him. The Bentley moved like a predator through the city streets, silent and deliberate, its engine a low growl beneath the leather seats. I sat stiff against the door, fingers clutching the sapphire pendant he had pressed into my palm moments before. The chain was cool against my skin, but the meaning of it was hotter than fire. A tracker, he had called it, a microphone, a lifeline disguised as jewelry. I was being marked, tagged, claimed. Luca Vital leaned back in his seat, one arm draped casually across the rest, as if this was nothing more than a late-night drive. But every so often his eyes cut to me, sharp as glass blue and unyielding. They unsettled me more than his security men did, more than the gun I had glimpsed tucked under his jacket, because behind at gaze was knowledge. Knowledge of me, of my grandmother, of bloodlines I never knew I carried. "You still don't believe me," he said, not as a question, but as a certainty. I wanted to argue, to laugh, to say this was insanity. But the images he had shown me in the restaurant photographs of my grandmother beside a man with the same eyes, the same jawline as mine, lingered too vividly in my mind. Instead, I whispered, "Why me? Why now?" He looked away for the first time, his profile cut against the lights flashing past the windows. "Because Antonio Vizzini is dead, 3 days ago in Palermo. When he lived, he watched over you from afar. His enemies respected his boundaries. Now there are no boundaries, only predators who see you as both inheritance and prey." The words felt like stones dropping into my chest. My grandmother had spoken of olive groves, of family disputes, but never of a brother who commanded empires in Sicily. Never of a man feared by entire cities. And now his death had become the match striking against dry tinder. The Bentley veered off Lakeshore Drive into a private underground garage. Sleek cars lined the walls, Ferraris, Maseratis, all gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. The door closed behind us with a metallic echo, sealing me in with him. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice tight. "My home," he said simply. "You will stay here tonight." I shook my head no louder than I intended. "I'm not staying with you. I don't know you." He stepped closer as the driver and security melted into the background shadows. "You know me better than you think, and you are staying because right now there are Calabrian enforcers stationed outside your apartment. 3 more at your cousin's building." Fear slammed into me so hard my knees weakened. "Ellie." "If they hurt her," I began, but his hand lifted, stopping my words. "She is safe for now. My people are watching theirs. But the moment they see you return to her, you both become targets." The elevator doors opened and he guided me inside. His hand at the small of my back was not rough, but it was implacable, a pressure that told me I had no choice. We rose higher and higher, the numbers climbing with the soundless smoothness of wealth, until the doors opened directly into a penthouse that looked more like a kingdom than a home. Walls of glass overlooked the lake, and the city lights below glittered like fallen stars. I stepped forward, dizzy with disbelief. He poured amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses, his movements steady, practiced. "Running won't save you, Sophia," he said. "These people have reach across oceans. Your only protection now is association with someone they fear more than they desire, revenge." "And that's you?" I asked, my voice sharp with disbelief. His mouth curved faintly, something between arrogance and truth. The Vital family has spent generations ensuring no one dares ask that question aloud. I set the glass he offered me untouched on a polished table. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "Why involve yourself at all?" He moved closer until the city lights behind him framed his silhouette like fire. "Because I made a promise to a dying man. And because whether you accept it yet or not, you are no ghost in this world, Sophia. You are a Vizzini." The name wrapped around me like chains and wings all at once. My bloodline had been exposed, my life rewritten in a single night. I was no longer the invisible waitress in second-hand heels. I was a target, and Luca Vital was both my captor and my shield. As I stared at him across the glittering penthouse, a single truth settled into me like ice. I was not free anymore. Not from the past, not from the future, and not from him. The first thing I noticed about the penthouse was the silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a home at rest, but the charged stillness of a place designed to impress and intimidate. The glass walls overlooked Lake Michigan, glittering black and silver under the night sky. Expensive furniture sat arranged with military precision. No clutter, no softness. It felt like a palace built on glass and steel, and I was the uninvited guest trapped inside it. The elevator doors closed behind me with a finality that made my stomach clench. I tested the thought of leaving, but even if I ran to the hall, I had seen the fingerprint scanner, the coded key card. Escape wasn't an option. My chest tightened. I was not a guest here. I was contained. Luca moved through the space like a man who belonged everywhere, his steps unhurried, his presence swallowing the silence. He poured himself another drink, his profile sharp against the glow of the skyline. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "This is temporary. You'll have the guest room until we decide what happens next." I repeated the word bitter on my tongue. "You mean until you decide." His eyes flicked toward me, then steady blue flames in the dim light. "You think you have choices out there?" he asked. "Right now, there are men posted outside your cousin's apartment waiting to use her as bait. Others are watching your old neighborhood. If you step into the street, you will vanish. Do you want to gamble with Ellie's life?" The mention of her name cracked something inside me. I wanted to scream, to run, to demand he release me, but the picture his words painted was too vivid, too real. Instead, I crossed my arms, holding myself together. "And what do you want from me?" I asked. "If this is about debts or favors or bloodlines, just say it." He set down the glass and walked closer until the air between us felt charged like a storm ready to break. "What I want is irrelevant. What matters is what others believe you are worth. To them, you are Antonio Vizzini's blood, the last living heir of a man they loved, hated, and feared in equal measure. They will come fall, or you and they will not stop." His words pressed against my chest, heavy, suffocating. I shook my head, trying to push them away. My grandmother was just a woman who baked bread and told me stories. She never mentioned empires or betrayals. Luca's expression softened for the first time, a flicker of something almost human breaking through the steel. "She wanted to protect you from it, but blood has a way of catching up with us." I turned away, walking deeper into the penthouse, needing distance from him, from his certainty, from the weight of this new reality. The guest room door stood open. Inside, a silk pajama set lay neatly folded on the bed, the tag still attached and my exact size. My chest tightened again. He had prepared this. He had expected me. I spun back toward him, my voice sharp. "How long have you been watching me?" "Long enough to know you read poetry in the park during your breaks. Long enough to know you visit your grandmother's grave every Sunday with lilies. Long enough to know you are stronger than you believe." The confession chilled me more than his threats. He hadn't stumbled upon me by accident. He had been circling my life like a hawk watching, waiting. "You are not my prisoner," he said, his voice lower now. "You are under my protection, and there is a difference." I wanted to deny it, but when I looked into his eyes, I saw no mockery, only relentless certainty. The realization struck me harder than any threat. He wasn't asking for trust. He wasn't asking for permission. He had already decided my life was tied to his. I closed the guest room door behind me, hands trembling against the handle. No lock, no escape, just silk pajamas laid out like an invitation to a life I hadn't chosen. My reflection in the glass showed a woman caught between worlds, a waitress in borrowed clothes carrying a name that could burn cities. And somewhere in the penthouse, Luca Vital waited, watching, ready to decide if I would become his responsibility or his weapon. Either way, I knew the truth. My life no longer belonged to me. Morning light poured into the penthouse as if the sun itself had been invited inside, but its warmth did nothing to soften the edges of what had become my prison. The blinds had opened on their own, a silent reminder that nothing here was under my control. I dressed in the clothes Luca had stocked for me. Jeans, soft as silk, a cream sweater, flat boots, all in my size, as if he had been planning this for months. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like someone who belonged in this world of glass and power. But inside, I still felt like a trespasser. I followed the smell of coffee down a hallway into a dining room that could have seated 20, though only one place had been set at the far end from where Luca sat with a laptop and several phones spread before him. He wore a dark sweater and looked younger, less threatening than the man in the suit from the restaurant, but the illusion vanished when he lifted his eyes to mine. They were the same eyes that had frozen me that first night, blue and unreadable. "Sit," he said without looking away. I lowered myself into the chair at the farthest end. My voice was steady, but my hands were not. "For all I know, you've invented everything about my grandmother," I said. "All this talk about bloodlines and enemies, it could be a story to trap me." He closed the laptop slowly and pushed a folder across the table. Everything I've told you can be verified. Inside were photographs. Old yellowed images of my grandmother standing beside a man I didn't recognize, but whose jawline mirrored my own. There were clippings in Italian that my rusty reading still managed to translate. Police investigation, shipping empire, Carlo Russo undercover. Antonio Vizzini. The final page was a birth certificate, my father's name printed clearly, but with dates that made the official story impossible. My stomach tightened. This could all be fabricated, I whispered. It could. He agreed, but it isn't. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed once. He answered, listened for a moment, then his expression darkened. He spoke in rapid Italian, a clipped command. When he ended the call, his eyes were sharper than I'd ever seen them. Your cousin went back to her apartment to get clothes, he said. My people spotted Calabrians watching the building. We need to move now. Ice slid down my spine. You said she was safe. She is while you remain under my protection. But if they realize you aren't there, they'll use her to get to you. He was already moving, calling orders to his men. The penthouse that had felt like a gilded cage moments ago now became a command center buzzing with silent efficiency. I ran after him, panic clawing at my throat. What are you going to do? I demanded. Get your cousin out before they make a move. The elevator ride down felt endless. Luca's entire demeanor had shifted. The controlled predator was gone, replaced by something colder, more lethal. When the doors opened, his men were already waiting by the Bentley weapons, hidden but ready. Stay in the car until I tell you otherwise, he said, handing me something small and glittering. What is this? I asked. A pendant. A tracker. If we're separated, I'll know where you are. He fastened it around my neck himself, his fingers brushing the pulse at my throat. If you're in danger, say Azure into the microphone. My team will hear you. I wanted to protest, but the urgency in his voice made my words die on my tongue. I slid into the Bentley, clutching the pendant. The car shot forward, cutting through traffic like a blade. On the way, he spoke without looking at me. Your grandmother's brother was not just a mafia boss, Sophia. He was a strategist who survived wars between families that destroyed others. His enemies waited for Tiamon, his moment, his death, your appearance. They think controlling you gives them legitimacy. I stared out at the city streets, my mind spinning. You're saying they want to use me like a weapon? Yes. Or an heir. Or a wife, to bind their power to theirs. The Bentley turned sharply onto Ellie's street. Luca pointed to a black SUV parked halfway down the block. Calabrians, he said grimly. They've been more efficient than I anticipated. His men began to fan out, moving with military precision. The street that had always been a quiet haven now looked like a stage set for violence. My heart pounded. Ellie was in there somewhere, terrified and alone. Luca's voice was low but steady. Stay in the car. If you go inside, you give them exactly what they want. They will take you both. I gripped the pendant at my throat. From the window I saw shadows moving in Ellie's building, and for the first time I understood with perfect clarity. My life wasn't just mine anymore. It was a piece on a board being moved by forces older and darker than I had imagined. And Ellie was already caught in the crossfire. The phone rang before Luca's men had even reached Ellie's building. It wasn't one of his lines, but mine, the dead phone I had left at the restaurant, now glowing with new life. My pulse hammered as I answered and heard my cousin's voice trembling with fear. Sophia, there are men here. They say they are looking for you. They won't let me leave. Her words cracked like glass inside my chest. I wanted to bolt from the Bentley to reach her, but Luca pressed his hand down on mine, his gaze sharp. Keep her talking, he ordered. Ellie, are you hurt? I asked, my voice breaking. No, but they... Her voice cut off, replaced by a new one, deep smooth with a cultured Italian accent. Ms. Russo, a pleasure to finally speak with you. I froze. The air in the car turned to stone. Luca's eyes narrowed, recognition flashing instantly. He leaned closer, his hand tightening over mine, but he didn't take the phone. He wanted me to hear it. Who is this? I asked, my throat dry. Someone with a vested interest in your family's legacy, the man said. Someone who believes it has been mismanaged for too long. My voice cracked. What do you want? What I have always wanted, he said calmly. A conversation. You will come to your cousin's apartment alone and we will discuss terms. Until then, your cousin will remain my guest. The line went dead. Silence crashed down in the car except for the thrum of my heart and the sound of Luca's slow, deliberate breathing. That was Giancarlo Bianchi, he said finally. The name was sharp and heavy like a blade. Who is he? I whispered. A rival. Old blood, old grudges. He has been waiting for Antonio Vizzini's death for decades. And now he has Ellie, I said, my voice rising. Luca leaned forward, speaking into his watch in rapid Italian. Around us, men melted from side streets, moving toward the building with deadly focus. He turned back to me, his expression colder than winter. We are not handing you over. If you storm the building, she'll be caught in the crossfire, I said. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking. And if you go inside, you'll be taken, and this entire city will burn in the war that follows. For 15 agonizing minutes, the car remained still while Luca's men surrounded the block. Then the building door burst open, and I saw Ellie, her face pale but alive, escorted by armed men loyal to Luca. Behind them, 2 Calabrians were dragged half-conscious, their guns ripped away. Relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. But before I could move, a sharp crack split the air. A gunshot. Luca reacted instantly, pushing me down into the footwell as the Bentley roared away, tires screaming. The window shuddered under impact but held bulletproof glass, deflecting the shot. We have a tail, Luca snapped. Through the rear window, I saw them 2 black SUVs weaving through traffic, their headlights cutting like knives. The driver's knuckles whitened on the wheel as he pushed the car faster. They want me, I whispered. Bianchi believes he has a claim to the Vizzini territories, Luca said, his voice like iron. With you, he gains legitimacy. Without you, he is nothing. The SUVs drew closer, engines howling. Luca's men in cars behind us fell into formation, but I could feel the danger pressing closer like a storm about to break. Luca's hand settled on my shoulder, steady, strong. If they catch us, he said, remember what I told you. Say the word, Azure. Fear surged hot and choking, but I lifted my head and looked into his eyes. Why are you doing this for me? For a moment, the steel cracked. His voice dropped low, almost tender. Because your grandfather asked me to. Because you matter more than you know. Then the SUVs closed the distance, and the chase turned into war. The warehouse smelled of oil and steel, the kind of place where secrets were forged and blood was spilled. The Bentley had slipped inside through a pair of massive rolling doors that slammed shut behind us, cutting off the chaos of the city. Outside, Bianchi's men circled like vultures, but inside, Luca's soldiers moved with military precision. Armed guards lined the walls, snipers took positions in the rafters, and screens flickered with live feeds of the street. This was not a hideout, it was a fortress. Luca stood at the center of it all, issuing orders in clipped Italian, his voice low but commanding. Men twice his size obeyed instantly and without question. He was no longer just a powerful man in a tailored suit. Here he was, something more a king, preparing for war. I hovered at the edge of the glass-walled office, watching him, watching the way every eye in the room followed his lead. And then his gaze found me, pinning me like a blade. Come, he said, his tone not a request. Inside the office, he closed the door, and the noise of the warehouse faded to a hum. For the first time since this nightmare began, we were alone again. He placed a velvet box on the table between us, and when he opened it, the light caught on a ring platinum set with sapphires deep as his eyes. My breath caught. What is this? I whispered. Protection, he answered. No, my voice broke sharp against the silence. This is something else. It is both, he said evenly. Bianchi respects only 2 things, power and tradition. A public engagement between us would force his hand. He could not touch you without declaring war against both families. I stared at the ring, its cold fire burning into my vision. An engagement. With a man I had met only days ago, it was madness. And yet the way he said it, the calm certainty in his voice, made it sound inevitable. You don't even know me, I said. His jaw tightened. I know you are strong enough to face a man like Bianchi without flinching. I know you are clever enough to turn negotiations on their head when even I saw no way out. I know you work yourself to exhaustion for a mother who may never recover, and for a cousin who depends on you. I know you carry burdens that would have crushed lesser people. Each word struck deep like arrows piercing through armor I had built for years. He knew too much about me. And yet instead of fear, I felt something else stirring inside me. A dangerous warmth. This isn't real. I whispered more to myself than to him. Is it not? He countered, stepping closer, his voice low, rougher now. Perhaps it began as strategy, but I do not make offers I am not willing to honor fully. My pulse pounded as he lifted the ring. His fingers brushed mine, and heat shot through me sharp and sudden. He waited, not pushing, not forcing, but watching me with that relentless gaze. The choice was mine, and yet I knew if I refused, I would be walking into Bianchi's hands unprotected, exposed. Slowly I held out my hand. The ring slid onto my finger with perfect precision, as though it had been waiting for me all along. His touch lingered at my wrist, and he whispered words that were both vow and warning. Mine to protect. Mine to cherish. Beth, or I could catch my breath. His hand rose to my face, cupping it gently. Then his mouth found mine in a kiss that shattered every barrier between us. It wasn't calculated or cold. It was fierce, hungry, and real. When we broke apart, my knees threatened to give way, and the world itself seemed changed. We have 30 minutes before Bianchi arrives, Luca said softly, his thumb brushing across my lower lip. Time enough to decide how we present this to him. And after I asked, still trembling. A smile ghosted across his mouth, not cold, not cruel, but something almost warm. After we begin building an empire together. The words terrified me, and yet deep inside a part of me already believed them. Snow fell softly over Chicago 3 months later, turning the city into a glittering kingdom of white and shadow. From the penthouse window, I watched the flakes drift against the skyline, each one vanishing as it touched the glass. Behind me, Luca spoke in rapid Italian, his voice sharp as he finalized arrangements for a board meeting that was anything but ordinary. The old families were coming tomorrow. Men who had lived their lives by blood and power, who would now be forced to sit across from me, the woman they once called an outsider, a waitress, a ghost. I touched the sapphire ring that now circled my finger, the same one that had once felt like a cage, but now carried the weight of survival. The night Luca slid it onto my hand, everything had shifted. I had gone from being invisible to being a name whispered in marble halls. Sophia Russo, the last Vizzini blood. Life inside this new world was nothing like the restaurant where I had learned to disappear. It was endless meetings in boardrooms filled with smoke and whispered threats. It was shaking hands with men whose smiles never touched their eyes. It was watching entire communities hang on decisions made behind glass doors. And every time I falter, every time my voice shook, I felt Luca's steady gaze from across the table reminding me I could not afford weakness. Ellie visited often, though she still looked at Luca with suspicion. He had paid for her nursing degree, given her protection and a future, but she had not forgiven the way he had pulled us both into his storm. Yet I saw her begin to thaw slowly, cautiously as he kept his word, and never once allowed harm to touch her. She teased me, sometimes whispering that the man who had become my shield looked at me with more than duty in his eyes. I always denied it, but my pulse betrayed me whenever his hand brushed mine during a meeting, or when his voice softened when he spoke only to me. But beneath the polished surface, danger coiled. Bianca had not accepted defeat. The partnership I had forced upon him still tasted like ash in his mouth. He pressed at the edges, testing Luca's patience, trying to lure allies back into the shadows. Every report, every file placed before me carried hints of betrayal, whispers of secret deals, shipments, diverted weapons stockpiled in Calabria. One night I confronted Luca about it. He was standing by the window, his reflection tall and dangerous against the snow-lit city. "You knew this would happen," I said. "He will never accept peace, not with me here, not with you holding what he believes is his." Luca's expression was carved from stone. "That is why we prepare. That is why you stand beside me tomorrow. They need to see you not as a pawn, not as a prize, but as the heir Antonio intended you to be." The words chilled me. I had never asked for this legacy, never asked for power that could destroy lives or save them. But there was no going back. I had stepped into this world the night I answered him in Italian, and I could not step out again. Tomorrow, the old families would look into my eyes searching for weakness, and Bianchi would be waiting for any crack in the foundation Luca and I had built. I knew then that the snow falling outside was no symbol of peace. It was as a shroud, a reminder that winter had only begun and that survival in this world would demand more from me than I had ever believed possible. And as I stood watching the snow with the weight of my grandfather's blood on my shoulders, I felt Luca step behind me, his hand resting lightly at my waist. His voice was low, steady, carrying both promise and warning. Whatever comes, Sophia, we face it together. The words should have comforted me. Instead, they filled me with a sharper truth. Together did not mean safe. Together meant war. The boardroom smelled faintly of leather and smoke, the kind of place where decisions worth billions were carved into history with nothing more than a handshake. The long table gleamed under the chandelier's cold light, and at its far end sat the old family's men, whose names carried centuries of power. Their eyes shifted between me and Luca, as if measuring the distance between predator and prey. I sat with my back straight, the sapphire ring glinting on my finger like a seal of authority. My pulse hammered, but I kept my face calm. Silence stretched heavy as Bianchi entered, at last his silver hair immaculate, his overcoat draped across his shoulders like a crown. His men lingered by the doors, eyes sharp, hands twitching near hidden weapons. He did not look at Luca first. He looked at me. His gaze was cold, dissecting, weighing the blood in my veins against the empire he wanted to claim. Miss Russo, he said, his voice cultured, but edged with steel. You wear the ring of alliance, yet I see no vow, no ceremony. Just words spoken in desperation. Do you really believe such theatrics will hold the loyalty of men who have bled for tradition? Luca's hand brushed mine under the table, grounding me. But it was my voice that answered. I believe loyalty is earned, not bought by blood spilled in back alleys. My grandfather understood that when he built schools, when he fed families, when he gave dignity where there had been none. If loyalty only comes at the end of a gun, then it is worth nothing. A murmur rippled through the room, some amused, some unsettled. Bianchi's lips curved into a smile that was anything but warm. Brave words from someone who once carried trays of wine to men she dared not look in the eye. Do you really imagine that bloodlines can be rewritten with charity? Something inside me hardened. I met his gaze unflinching. I imagine that power is nothing if it destroys the people it claims to protect. The silence that followed was dangerous, thick with the weight of men deciding if I was a woman to be dismissed or a force to be reckoned with. Luca leaned forward, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. You wanted legitimacy, Bianchi. Now you have it. Sophia Russo stands as Antonio's heir and as my future wife. If you challenge her, you challenge me. And I promise you, that is a war you will not survive. The words fell like stones into water, spreading ripples that no one could ignore. For the first time, Bianchi's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed, as if calculating the cost of underestimating me. Then slowly he leaned back, his fingers drumming once on the polished wood. Very well, he murmured. Let us see if the girl can carry the weight of the name she clings to. The meeting broke hours later, but his words followed me like a shadow. That night, as I stood at the penthouse window, I felt the storm pressing closer than ever. The city below glittered, but I knew darkness lurked in every corner. Luca came up behind me, his voice low. You shook them, Sophia, even Bianca. But he will not stop. He will wait. Watch test your strength until either you fall or he does. I turned to him, the weight of everything pressing down. And if I fall, what happens then? His blue eyes burned with something fierce and unyielding. Then I fall with you. The promise sent both warmth and terror through me, because for the first time I understood the truth. This was no longer just about survival. It was about destiny, and in a world ruled by shadows, destiny demanded a price that had not yet been paid. The night of the final confrontation came without warning. A storm rolled in off Lake Michigan, the sky split by lightning that cast the city in sudden flashes of white. From the penthouse windows, I watched the storm approach its fury, mirroring the turmoil twisting inside me. Luca stood at my side, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and controlled as he gave orders to his men. Word had come from Sicily. Bianchi had grown impatient. He was no longer content with veiled threats or boardroom whispers. He had flown in with reinforcements, men who had sworn oaths long before I was even born. They were moving through the city like a tide of shadows, their eyes fixed on me, the last link to Antonio Vizzini's bloodline. When Luca ended the call, he turned to me, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw a flicker of something rare. Not power, not command, but fear. "Tonight will decide everything," he said. "If we win, the families will rally behind us. If we lose, the city belongs to Bianchi by morning." I thought of Ellie asleep in a secure safe house far from here. I thought of my grandmother's grave and the lies she had buried with her. I thought of the waitress I had been months ago, the ghost who drifted through Lissimo unnoticed. That girl was gone forever. In her place stood someone who carried the weight of an empire she never asked for, but could no longer refuse. The meeting was set in the warehouse district where it had all begun. Luca and I arrived in silence, the Bentley cutting through rain-slick streets while armed escorts followed at a distance. Inside the warehouse, his men moved with lethal precision, securing entrances, checking weapons, scanning the shadows. But nothing could prepare me for the sight that awaited us when Bianchi stepped into the room. He was dressed in black, his silver hair slicked back, his eyes gleaming with the hunger of a man who had waited his entire life for this moment. Behind him came his soldiers, more than I could count, each one armed, each one loyal to a dream of power rooted in blood and fear. "So this is how Antonio's legacy ends," Bianchi said, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. Not with strength, not with honor, but with a frightened girl clinging to a vital's hand. I stepped forward before Luca could answer, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. "Antonio's legacy does not end tonight. It changes. He built something greater than fear, and I will not let you turn it back into ashes." Bianchi's laugh was cruel. "You think words will stop bullets. You think sentiment will make men bow." "No," I said quietly, "but truth might." I reached into the folder Luca had given me days before the evidence Antonio had gathered before his death, records, photographs, testimonies proving Bianchi's betrayals to the very families he now claimed to represent. I held them high so every man could see. "This is the man who calls himself your leader. He steals from his own allies, he makes deals with enemies, he would sell you all for his throne." For a moment, silence reigned. Then voices rose, anger, confusion, disbelief. Bianchi's face darkened, his hand reaching inside his coat. He would have drawn his weapon if not for Luca moving faster than I had ever seen him. In one smooth motion, his gun was out-leveled steady. "Do it, Luca," Bianchi sneered. "Kill me and prove you are no different." But Luca did not pull the trigger. Instead, he lowered the gun, his voice like steel. "I am not my father, and she is not her grandfather. The world has changed, Bianchi. You are a relic of a time that is already dead." The old families shifted. Their eyes left Bianchi and turned to me. And in that moment, I realized it was not Luca they were waiting for. It was me. I raised my chin, my heart pounding. "I am Sofia Russo, blood of Maria Vizzini, granddaughter of Antonio. I will not rule with fear. I will not sell our people's future for the greed of the past. If you want me to lead, then follow me now. If you want chains, then follow him." The choice hung heavy in the air. Lightning lit the room for an instant, casting Bianchi's face in harsh relief. His hand tightened on the pistol he had drawn, but before he could act, his own men stepped back away from him. Their silence was louder than any words. Bianchi roared with fury, lifting his weapon. The gunshot split the air, but it was not mine he struck. Luca's men fired in unison, and Bianchi crumpled to the ground, his power evaporating with the last breath he dragged into the stormy night. When the echoes faded, all eyes returned to me. They did not kneel, they did not cheer, but in their silence I saw something even more dangerous. Acceptance. Later, when the city slept beneath the storm, I stood on the balcony of the penthouse, rain dampening my hair. Luca joined me, his hand warm at my back, his eyes softer than the steel he had shown in the warehouse. "It is over," he said quietly. No, I whispered. It is only beginning. He turned me to face him, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that tasted of rain and fire, of promises kept and promises yet to come. When we broke apart, he touched the sapphire ring circling my finger. You chose this life, Sophia, and now it is ours. I looked out over the city lights, and for the first time I did not feel like a ghost in its shadows. I felt like something new forged from fire and blood, from fear and love. The waitress was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had faced the storm and survived. And as dawn broke over Chicago, painting the skyline in gold, I knew the truth. This was no longer just a story of survival.